sit there
table
actually
of
watching.
contents? Did we get
No,
something?
we haven't.
No,
Okay.
this is something I worked on over the course of the last couple of days.
So it's 5:02, and it is the Landscape Subcommittee meeting of the South Kingstown Planning Board. It is Wednesday, the 19th of November. Randy, do you want to start us off?
Yes. So, what I have to get us going is a table of contents that outlines some of the things that I think are important for landscape regs. I think there's going to be items within this table of contents that will need to reach into other locations of the regs that aren't, outside of the landscape regs. And the example that I would use is I have a line item, first line item called site design. Now there's a lot to the overall regs that can be site design oriented, placing buildings, parking lot, that type of thing. This is meant to be sort of a way of capturing, thinking about the site that you have, that you're working with as a developer, and identifying those kind of features that are important to maintain, but also thinking about how changes to the site can impact the installation of landscaping. So let's say you got a slope and there's a big cut. How should you think about that? And that would tie into other elements of the table of contents that I will now pass out, such as soils and soil conservation and things like that, that need to be thought about. So I think the best way to do is just sort of generally run through this list, and then I can just give you my thought processes on that, and then we can get into it a little deeper after that. So there's site design, and as I was saying, I think this is going to be something that reaches into other locations in the regs, but this is meant to be here to really just give sort of a context of how to think about the site from a landscape standpoint. Things like sort of a do's and don'ts, or if you do this, this will be a concern. Like the cut fill that I was talking about, so this could talk about soil conservation. There's a tree preservation chapter, which that would reference. There's then following on that, a site features conservation, connectivity. That's sort of, how you would think about if you're working with multiple sites that are adjoining each other, or if you are working in sort of, let's say, downtown Wakefield, and you've got a site next to you that has a walkway that comes to your site. There's a sense of, making sure there's connectivity, or thinking about how you'd connect your site to other sites. Plant material selection, soils preservation and creation, plant material installation, parking lot buffers, parking lot interior landscaping, site gathering spaces and amenities, screening and buffers, street and frontage plantings, which I separate from and make different from streetscape plantings and amenities, stormwater design and plantings, and then post-construction review and approval. So those are the general categories. I think they're relatively self-explanatory, but I think, and some of this stuff also shows up in your regs in other locations too. So there's certainly that kind of overlap, but I'm trying to make, the approach that I'm taking is to make this as holistic of a reg as it can be, with the understanding that it's going to have impacts on other parts of the regulations. Questions from anybody?
I have a question. Would you just explain what you see as the difference between the street and frontage plantings and the streetscape plantings?
So street and frontage plantings are probably more residential or industrial in nature, whereas streetscape plantings would be changes to existing or new lots that are commercially oriented, where you're trying to create a sense of a streetscape there. So for instance, an example I could use is thinking about the old Tower Hill Road and thinking about some of the way internal roads should relate to Old Tower Hill Road itself, or how the plantings along the street should be designed with other streetscape features to be able to create a village context or setting or character. So differentiating it that way.
Okay.
We find ourselves often asking for what we have been calling a streetscape image, particularly at the entrances to subdivisions, so that not only is it in concert with the remaining portions of the roadway, but it provides an appropriate entrance as opposed to what you see once you.
Yeah, entrances is one that I was sort of kicking around and trying to figure out, should it be a standalone or should it be incorporated into this? And I think the way you explain that, as far as relating to, on any given street, relating to other entrances, from a streetscape standpoint, is an interesting way to look at that.
And of course, in a more rural sense than talking about your typical Main Street streetscape.
Right.
Should the chapter simply be streetscape rather than making it an adjective of plantings and amenities?
Well, I think that I wouldn't want to lose sight, and I certainly could put that in as a introduction to the chapter, but I wouldn't want to lose sight of streetscapes and the intent being creating that feel that includes benches and the paving materials that can help to create that sense of character of the streetscape itself. Which would be
I think though, I think we're limiting, I feel like making it streetscape plantings and amenities is more limiting than just making it streetscape. And that it's encouraging the reader to think more narrowly rather than more expansively. And what you're describing is to think more expansively.
Yeah, though I would think if it were just streetscape, I see what you're saying. I'm just wondering if there's a way to make the, because part of this is using it in sort of the real life in the meeting and saying, so you can say, let's go to the streetscape chapter because I want to talk about whatever that might be that you want to talk about, bench placement or bike racks, and where within the streetscape those make the most sense as it relates to a store frontage or something like that. Yeah, I could see the merits of maybe just calling it streetscape. I like having a little more description in the title. I mean, beyond street plantings and amenities, what else would there be, do you think, that would be limiting if we were to call those two things out?
I think it can be as broad as the content that follows the chapter.
It will be, and the introduction can take care of it.
And that's part of, I think, maybe from my mind, a question about what would be included in those kinds of things. You know, so when I think about streetscapes, I would think about plantings and amenities. I'd think about their relative locations from the curb line to the face of building or back of sidewalk, and creating spaces like what you're showing right there, Jamie.
Yeah.
You know, but I also think it could also start to relate to other materials like surface materials, and pocket parks and things like that. But the pocket parks would really go under site gathering and amenities.
Let's talk about materials and textures. You just mentioned that, materials. Is that something that would be under streetscape plantings and amenities, or is that other topics?
No, I would see that under streetscape plantings and amenities, as well as getting into something like gathering spaces, and that would be a location where you might be talking about those kinds of things.
And that's, you're talking about hardscape type materials
Right.
that, yeah, crosswalks and whatever you
Mhm.
like.
In some aspects, Liz, what you may do is within that material kind of subject matter,
Yep.
you may say the following materials such as are found to be acceptable. And you get some examples.
Brick pavers.
But again, when I hear brick pavers, I'm thinking Boston City pavers, clay pavers, not Versalock, gonna fade over
Well,
time pavers.
That's a good point, and I would
And they're
definitely
two different price points.
And I would definitely make sure that distinction is in there, because a gray blend of a concrete paver, when it weathers, the intensity of the coloring will fade, but the modeling character is likely going to remain. Not as intense, but will remain. If you were to put a red,
City Hall,
no, if you were to put a red concrete
it's
paver,
gonna be pink. over
it'll
time.
be pink over time.
Right, that's true.
You know, so I think, you know, there is the, I think this is acceptable and this is not acceptable.
And that's what I think, but my point would be, you're gonna list some absolutely acceptable materials, like, you're gonna say like City Hall, clay
Yep.
pavers, like, or put categories.
Stamped concrete.
Under color, you may have certain, under monochrome, to Randy's point, whether it's a Belgian block or a concrete version of a Belgian block, those characteristics degrade less than a red City Hall clay paver and a concrete manufactured that has aggregate and color in it,
Right,
because the
right.
color fades and the aggregate starts to pop. Then you potentially may have things that are absolutely not acceptable.
Doesn't some of it depend on the scale that we're talking about too? I agree, it's color and it's durability and changeability, but also depending on where we're talking about, you know, whether we're talking about huge
Yeah,
a scale or a small scale.
you might be talking about a development, let's say if someone did a South County Commons, and you wanted to talk about the sidewalk materials, and you gave them a range. I mean, at that point, you're talking about a much broader approach to the regulations, and you're talking about architecture, and you got guidelines for those kinds of things. I think you'd be listing those acceptable types of hardscape materials within the context of the character that they're going to be creating. So if it's going to be sort of an old New England character, you know, the concrete, probably you wouldn't want to have just regular poured white concrete. You might want to have exposed aggregate concrete, because exposed aggregate is going to look like the white concrete will look in 20 years and weathered and that type of thing. And you'd probably find some use of bricks acceptable. But you probably wouldn't want to have like modern concrete pavers that are like the plank pavers that are like, you know, yay long by that wide, and just is out of context with that kind of setting. So I think it's more character than maybe scale.
Yes, that's a much better word.
Yeah. And then potentially say, you know, and things you wouldn't accept, bituminous sidewalks.
Right.
You think?
But that's where most developers, in some aspects, start the discussion.
Would maintenance be under post-construction review and approval?
No, I think it'd be a standalone chapter.
Okay.
Yeah. How do you handle that for like stormwater features and other types of things that you expect a level of maintenance during construction?
We require so in the planning board permittal process, we're looking long-term. So we require maintenance agreements, easement-wise, if it's an HOA or multiple properties like South County Commons. There's
right.
an internal HOA maintenance agreement, cross easements, as well as a recorded maintenance and operation plan for those structures, whether they're hard piped or open basins. There is a mandatory requirement of recording a document in the land records of what they are. the town soil and erosion control permit cover the construction phase while the site's disturbed. So that
Right.
CERC
Okay.
permit takes care of construction, and our recorded maintenance documents are in essence post-construction.
How do you handle like a project that will be phased and that might be a number of years, and the plantings that will go in phase one, you require like a year warranty on the plantings.
Regulations say a year, planning board usually requires 2.
Do you have any concerns about being able to, in a multi-year project, that they'd maintain the entire project to a certain quality and character? Or is that tough because of they're gonna want releases on certain things?
I think we'll take South County Commons. I've worked on some big projects like that where, say you have 600,000 square feet of, South Kingstown's not gonna get this, but you have 600,000 square feet of retail, the anchor tenant is Lowe's or Target, pick a better one, or even we'll say Whole Foods, which is more appropriate in town. It's Whole Foods, but then there's 6 other out parcels.
Right,
But in order to make Whole Foods work, there's a cut and fill aspect. So you're cutting half the site 12 feet, you're filling the other half of the site 12 feet. So 20 acres gets leveled.
right,
But I'm only building on the first 5. The other 15 get loom seeded, and we may actually hit them for some perimeter aspect of landscaping. Because like I have a comment on, for the parking lot interior landscaping, to me, there's also perimeter landscaping to that parking lot.
yeah. Don't I have that? Parking lot buffer is what I call it, so, yeah, but that's probably a better, yeah.
I think perimeter landscaping to the parking lot is potentially different than something you're trying to buffer,
Right,
right?
no, I would agree.
So in some instances, through the regulatory process, we would hit them with the perimeter that we know isn't gonna get disturbed, because then we get the street trees growing at the same time, same quantity. But the downside to that is I have someone watching 5 acres. I don't necessarily have someone watching 15 acres.
Right,
But to me, a tree planted well survives.
yeah, that's one of the reasons why I have a soils and I have a installation chapter. And in doing some of the reading that I've been doing, there are communities that are moving towards making sure that, soils are discussed. So, it's not just stripping and stockpiling loam. It's basically, if you're gonna be doing that exercise that you just talked about with a cut fill over a 10-acre site or whatever that might be, and you're basically mining soils, and you can be able to take soils and mix soils you're gonna have to create soils for the most part. To be able to do that and give the guidelines on how that could be done.
The other thing we talked about, in that scenario where you have a big cut and fill, the cut is getting rid of the A horizon, B horizon, so that natural loam layer and then topsoil and then maybe sand and gravel, that is
Yeah,
gone.
yes, exactly.
The fill side is 12 feet because buildings are going in. It's typically done in 12 to 18-inch lifts, compacted. So you have this very hard, durable, compacted layer that then the regulations say stick 3 inches of loom on the top and then try and get stuff to grow.
Right,
Yeah.
We've written regs that in your landscape islands, you have to reestablish almost a B horizon with some organic material, not just compacted gravel.
right, right.
And then put your 3 inches of screened loom on top of that new B horizon, which gives gives a little more opportunity for the heat islands to not soak everything up.
Right, I look at it as a very similar approach, which is if they spread the on-site gravel to create the fill and they do exactly what you're saying, is then, so that they can do it and be economical about it, they'll just go and create the whole site to that level, or the entire parking lot.
Yeah.
And then worry about the parking areas, or the planting areas, whether they're islands or
Yeah.
long, wide strips, is actually go in, dig out to a certain depth, incorporate more of a subsoil, but with some organics in there, and then create a layer on top, which is typically just a loam layer.
Yeah.
But to try to
I'm fine
create
with
that,
yeah.
yeah, try to create, because you can go off the deep end with creating soils, but I think the real effort is, what are the basic requirements for the plants to live, trees, primarily, and it's not just a gravel area that was been compacted to 90%, and then they come in and they dig a hole twice the size, put a couple of scoops of loam in, and expect it to live.
Exactly,
When
and
that root cannot get through
Right.
what's been compacted to 95% compaction.
And in the streetscape sense, have guidelines for a minimum planting pit size, but also give guidance to how to get organics under the sidewalk and within that as an option. Some of this stuff is going to be like I don't want to say menu, but give you the ability to have options for how to handle soils under sidewalks that help promote the growth of street trees. Some of these things are costly, but at least you can say, we have the tree pit area, then we have an area that's surrounding the tree pit that is yay wide, but under sidewalks, that is a soil or a material that the roots can grow into.
it's also protecting their investment, that's what it comes down to. And often we don't even see much of a soil discussion other than in their soil sedimentation erosion permit, and it comes to landscaping, and it's like, they may not even look up what the soil types are, let alone how to properly amend it.
Yeah, and I think, where we're talking about sites that are going to be, even if they're going to go in, they're going to regrade big portions of it, and they're going to maintain some trees, it's in those areas where they're going to be installing new trees and other plant material to create a soil horizon that the trees are likely to respond to.
That's kind
I have this, and I'll email this to everyone. This was from scenic.org, and it just talks about developing model ordinances. And there's just, again, it's very broad, but they talk about having a basis for the standards and things like enforcement provisions and administration. So I'll just pass this around. I'll make sure I email it to everyone. Thought it was,
Looks to me like an ash suffering from emerald ash borer on the right-hand side.
Well, what you have are oaks and maples that a developer has decided to turn all into topiaries.
You mean like up on, at the end of 138? Yeah.
This one's in Dayville, Connecticut, which is a kind of a village of Killenly that, what's gonna happen when these are 20 years, 30 years old? And they're supposed to be 30, 40, 50 feet tall, and they're all 15.
and look
The
at,
entire site. Conversely to that, this project, and again, I've written regs to deal with that, and I'm doing it so Randy, potentially anything he writes can put that in. I'll just go low first. Now, conversely to a development, that doesn't have, actually, we'll go across the street. That doesn't have that topiary, and these are what they're growing to.
mm,
Now, this development has a provision that they can't cut main
How do you
meters.
enforce that? Well, I guess, you can say that in the installation and all typical landscape planting
Must grow in
guidelines.
its natural intended shape, form.
And how does that play out over the years?
Again, it's
It's a matter of,
in Connecticut, it's $500 a day for a fine. So if you chop it down, it gets
Yeah,
very
that's-
expensive.
can you go back to that first image, Jamie?
Yeah.
Because where the two trees are on the right hand, on our right, that look less healthy. If you look at where they're planted and
Try and go to similar location to where I was.
Yeah, I think, yep.
okay,
perfect.
look at the slope where those two trees are planted.
Yeah.
You know,
Again, I've had.
rather than creating more of a berm with some kind of not necessarily retaining wall, but something that, you know, how long is it before those roots are exposed?
Yeah, and I think maybe what the answer to that would be is maybe the tree selection in that location would be something a little smaller than
you were
a
gonna
tree
do
that's
it.
going to be a big canopy
Yeah.
tree that the fact is it's just not getting the water that it needs to
Yeah,
establish
your
itself.
big deciduous shade trees can go in the center island,
Mm-hmm.
and then you may be more ornamental in the side. But again, if you, and one of the things too, Maria, is if you dictate, to Randy's point earlier, this is an access road, right? So
Mhm.
what are the landscaping requirements for an access road? And the photo I showed you before, there was a requirement that all access roads had to have a deciduous tree 40 feet on center, both sides of the road, and or in an island if an island was proposed. It dictated that. It also dictated that there was a minimum 8 feet back a curb, back a curb.
Yeah, right. That's the trick.
So
Yeah.
this developer would have had to change their parking
Yes.
configuration if
In
they
the-
had to adhere to a code.
Mm-hmm.
Now, also on these really big sites, you gotta
Look at the lights.
understand too, when you do 8 feet back a curb, a lot of times, right, round earth, flat site, surveying, and when they start from the east side to the west side, if they start from the perimeter and come to the middle, there's usually a loss of a couple feet somewhere as they take paper copies to real field conditions. So a lot of times you'll plan for 8 feet back a curb, and something has to give. I would have taken it out of the center island here.
Right. Well, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there was, yeah, again, a developer came in and just lopped them all. So again, those are, yeah.
But that's just a personal aesthetic too, for
Yes.
somebody.
Or Target who complained that they couldn't be seen.
Well, the funny thing about, like, you go up on Old Tower Hill Road, and the trees that they keep pruning, well, they've been doing it for years and years, but when they first went in and started doing it, if they had just let them grow and then lifted them up as a canopy,
Yeah, they yeah.
but they kept them at a height that was, they had to maintain that height to keep the visibility.
They should have just let these grow and then start at 6 feet understory and then go to 8 feet someday.
Right, right.
Clear branch. Yeah, this is, again, this one is not, I was not involved in this project. The other one where we have street trees 40 feet on center that are all deciduous in a rock cut. That one I was involved in.
What has been issues that you've faced in dealing with plant material selection?
Seasonality issues, lack of understanding of the site as a whole and how it might look in 10 years. Kind of segmentation rather than an overall plan.
Or what can I get locally at the nursery
Or what's
Versus-
cheap.
versus, on bigger sites, basically saying, I'll say a lot of our projects, even the bigger ones, seem to not understand that if you're buying 80 trees, you're buying them direct from Maryland.
Right.
Potentially. You're not going to the local nursery or Ocean State, or you're not going, you may go to Site One, but you're potentially big enough as a contractor to pull in directly from the nurseries that are from the growers.
Right.
So I think there's, I don't want to say lack of variety, but it just seems like we keep seeing like pin oaks. We keep seeing serviceberry for like deciduous shade trees versus maybe having a category of what is an acceptable street tree, right? What is an acceptable ornamental tree?
There
And
was-
maybe pulling off that list, but allowing deviation from it, but
Yeah.
at least giving some guidance.
Yeah, I mean, there was the list that URI did, it's somewhat dated at this point in time.
Trees.
And then we see a lack of understanding of how to actually plant a buffer. And of course, you can have to me, a screen is different from a buffer depending on context. And, straight rows of arborvitae, not our favorite thing, rather than understanding how to stagger various evergreen varieties. And I think having more clarity in the regs with better drawings and again the description of why that we're requiring this would also be helpful.
I think also we've heard quite a bit, well, if I leave the growth that's there.
It'll be fine.
Exactly. Not
It's
fine.
all it's a tangled mass of invasives, but it'll be fine.
That's right, not to worry.
So this is a big condo project in Bloomfield, Connecticut. And I'll drop down, this is a buffer. And it was designed to buffer these existing single-family homes. Again, they had some room here, but this is, I think what we would see is a row of arborvitaes when this is the buffer they planted. And this is probably 25 years after it being planted. So they changed the elevation. It's not, but it's extremely well vegetated. Again, leaf on versus leaf off, but
course.
there is some scattered interest, and they did have a change in topography. So instead of doing that just blanket row of arborvitaes, and again, this is, again, a buffer to office space to the right. I'll spin around in a minute. That this is, this is the well-planted summer deciduous, and there's your berm hiding in the background. So again, this was a developer who really was trying to serve two purposes.
Yeah,
There was no
makes
more value to that residential unit when they weren't staring at the highway right next to them.
Right.
And there was value that he recognized during the permitting process if I offered this to the planning board as a buffer so people driving by wouldn't see this big residential development, wouldn't see the density. But it's a different way to accomplish it. And I think, we have one applicant in the queue right now who's trying to do something more similar to this versus just doing a row of arborvitaes. This takes space. This is probably done in about 60 to 70 feet.
And we don't see berms utilized in the way that they
No.
could be.
Well, berms or even just topographic changes
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
really
Right.
do a lot.
And there's also that component of the dual purpose nature of landscaping where you're also using low impact design to manage stormwater along with the aesthetics of the landscaping. That's becoming more and more relevant at this point in time.
large industrial building. This is in in Windsor, actually not South Windsor, Windsor. And this is the use of more evergreen plantings in Birmingham.
Hmm.
Right, so you can do it, it's just how do you articulate it in the code? And this looks a little more natural than lining something up, right? I think this is your point, Maria, to try and make it
Yep.
a little more natural.
And the distance and the slope clearly makes it more likely to infiltrate, because it's not, you know,
It's not very abrupt.
Yes,
It's a little more
exactly.
subtle.
Yep.
But there's a very large industrial building, warehouse building behind that. And again, their intent was to buffer these homes from what's across the street. I just drive around when I'm bored, 'cause
That's fabulous.
Yeah, no, these are great.
It's funny what you
It's
see
just-
when you do things for a living, and, you know,
Great.
Yes.
I'm sure a doctor sees my limp in my right leg and knows that I'm gonna have a knee replacement at some point in the near future.
you're
This
his
is
Hawaii vacation.
Yeah, that's for sure.
No, so I think what Randy's trying to do is, provide some structure to what we discussed last, a few months ago.
Yes. And, you know, a way to have the process spelled out so that it's not, the engineers are doing the stormwater and the architects are doing the buildings, and they have, you know, everything is done to sort of 90%. Oh, let's add the landscaping now. There,
Actually, we did talk about this, that
having it be part of the team,
yeah.
part of the integration.
that the landscape architect, or a landscape architect, and again, there's gotta be a trigger mechanism, Randy, that projects greater than 5 lots and or projects greater than X number of square feet require the applicant to hire a landscape architect. So that they're,
Well, if you have a planting plan that has more than, I think the way the law is, more than 2 or maybe 4 units, they need to have it stamped by a landscape architect.
And you know, when
But that's different than the integration of the design approach.
right.
yes, like the
Having the
FDRP in our
landscape architect a part of the design team. I actually met with
exactly.
a friend the other day who was looking at a site in Connecticut, and he asked me, like, what should I do? I said, well, do you want to do something for profit, or do you want to do something that you could be proud of as a generational thing? And he said,
good.
well, both. So I said, well,
One.
aspirationally, hire a good design team. I didn't use the term engineer or surveyor yet. I said hire a good design team to lay out your site, and then go hire an engineer to make the site work.
Yeah, I mean, in our
The
FDRP
road.
regulations, they're supposed to look at the site as a whole before they begin to design the project. And when you have a landscape architect that is part of the team at the beginning, it really has a positive influence on the overall design. Yet, if the opposite happens and you have the engineer trying to describe how they, you know, took into consideration the site as a whole, it's almost always a fail.
Right. Have there been projects in town that have been successful in that approach, where it's more of a design team approach? I mean, I'm guessing in most communities, a lot of that work is done, unless they've got the regs to back it up, a lot of the work is done by the engineers, and the landscape architects come in after the fact.
I think probably the only one you've seen in the last 5 years I can reference is the conceptual plans associated with the housing authority that Union Studios did. You saw conceptual layout, conceptual landscaping done by an urban design team, and then the engineer was brought on after to put pen to paper on actual cross sections. The end product, density didn't yield, landscaping and some conceptual vernacular associated with the original design was value engineered out. But that was because they were hamstrung by some budget criteria versus a developer who may not be so hamstrung.
Initially, when, even though we just saw this for a little administrative change, the Stone Soup project took into account the site as a whole, the topography, the existing vegetation, and even though it wasn't a commercial project, it was residential, that was done well. But thus, what you referenced, the expression of the parsley around the pig, having the landscape architect come in at the 11th hour and,
But
Like
you
I
have
have an
to-
island with
right.
6 feet, what do you expect me to do in that?
Right.
yeah.
But you have to wonder whether, as you mentioned, Jamie, a lot of it's budget driven. I mean, how do you know that the developers haven't said, okay, this is how much you're getting,
Right.
right? This
Yeah.
is it, folks. So, and they come in at the end.
And we have been able at times to persuade the applicant that the landscape architect needs more authority and more money to make the project.
Earlier.
Yes.
And earlier.
Yeah, and earlier, yeah.
I think the only way, I want to say I've had some success doing this, is with a strong code
Mm-hmm.
that mandates the space required for things.
Yeah, yeah.
That way, even if the landscape
Yeah.
architect isn't there in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
every island actually, from a regulatory standpoint, is designed dimensionally to support what you want them to plant in it.
Yeah.
We've all seen the little 4-foot islands with someone planting a red maple in it going, well, how is that gonna work over time?
Question for Randy and Jamie. You talked about how, just because of the nature of these various topics, some of these topics will be found in other parts, in various parts of the regulations. How can we make that easier for someone to find? Is there a way, based on the fact that everything is now electronic, they can?
I
Cross-reference.
can
Yeah,
potentially
yeah.
do that to it. So we have the resources to, as it actually, the regulation started out with 52 cards, all spades, all clubs, all diamonds, and all hearts. They were all the same color red, right? Over the years, they've been thrown on the table, reshuffled, sections have been lost,
Mhm.
they're not all red anymore. Some got inserted, and then we added a few jokers, and then we actually added
lot
a
of
few. We added a few other cards from other decks. We still have 52 of them, but we no longer have a full set of spades, a full set of diamonds, all red in the nice bicycle card.
That's an interesting analogy.
We have the resources, and we're hoping in the next couple months to put an RFQ out to take our existing regulations and try and put them all back in the deck.
I had that in the back of my mind when I asked the
Okay,
question.
and put that all, that's the start of something.
Mhm.
And it was funny at,
Is that gonna be a wholesale relook at the regs?
not first is
reorganization
getting all the
first.
cards back in the
Oh,
bicycle
okay, yeah.
holder. And a couple of firms in New England have been very successful, literally taking 400-page codes, and after they look at them and realize and eliminate the redundancy, they're down to 225 pages of back in the box.
Right, and that's what I mean about cross-referencing. This will reach into things as opposed to repeating sections of this in another section. It's got to get cross-referenced.
So
Right.
you get the cards back in the deck. Then the second phase of that is, what do we need to strengthen? What do we need to explore? And again, you can potentially have a standalone code that is ready to go, that as part of that RFQ, you tell the consultant, this is our new code, we want it inserted in the you just add it as another card we threw on the table. Now this is the new code, make sure it's eliminated. So I don't think you have to put a pause, you can still run parallel courses here, but part of that is when you recodify everything and eliminate the redundancies, everything also becomes searchable. In the second phase, you start to turn to the graphic aspects of it. So instead of describing an R40 lot and there's all these setbacks inside there's one picture that shows an R40 lot with a front yard setback, side yard setback, and so it's a
Super
visual
helpful.
reference. And then, you know, the landscape code in some aspects, I think, could stand alone as, and I've done this before, as almost an appendix, where whenever there's a reference to landscaping, it says, go see Appendix A.
Yeah,
And then if you're making changes, you're not affecting the 200 pages, you're affecting a 20-page appendix or 30-page appendix.
Yeah.
And that appendix could be 100 pages. But I only have to go to the appendix if I ever have to landscape.
which
If
is
I'm
all
not
the time.
landscaping, I don't
Which is
care.
all the time.
Well, or couldn't you do both? Couldn't you have the appendix that's 30 pages that says landscaping appendix?
Yeah.
And also have it integrated in the main code? Is that
There would
too-
be a reference to it, yeah. You wouldn't do, again, we wouldn't want 200 pages with 30 pages of landscape code and then another 30 pages, so we're at 230. So we either integrate it or reference to it.
Kind of like the comprehensive plan where you have to
Yeah.
do it that way.
Like a lot of towns, when they develop architectural standards, they don't codify them in the 200 pages. It's cross-referenced out to another standalone document. Whenever you are triggered to adhere to commercial architectural standards, see Appendix B, and then Appendix B becomes your architectural guidelines.
So assuming the communities that have done this kind of integration successfully, and particularly since it's, well, probably recent past, but have used human, not AI, to accomplish this.
Have you used human to do it? Yes.
Right.
And one of the firms, Fitzgerald Holiday, I don't know if you've ever, FHI, but they
Which
were
are now IMEG.
which were acquired by
Yep.
someone, so they're now a much bigger multinational or national firm.
I think they might be multinational.
Multinational, so they were acquired. They have done it manually in AI, and they're
Mhm.
still sticking pretty much with manual, because they spend just as much time reviewing the AI version.
Oh,
And but again, they have used AI as a, like, maybe a first flush of things to see as a check and balance, but not as the main tool. Yeah, I wanna say they did Stonington's and potentially took a 300-page document down to like 260. Eliminating 140 pages without changing any of the regulatory requirements, just eliminating redundancy.
interesting. Yeah, it does seem as though our biggest challenges are the incorporation of the site as a whole, the landscape architect involvement, connectivity, even plant material selection. I mean, there'll be obvious things as far as avoiding invasives, but then material that works in our region.
Yeah, I wanna say the only.
'Cause we do wanna create some
maybe this is a
flexibility.
challenge we're in. given the location of South Kingstown, there's only, I don't wanna overcomplicate the regulation, but there's kind of three types of landscaping in town.
Mhm.
We have coastal, so if you were doing a project, we'll say south of Route 1, there's a different landscape vernacular. There's that next layer, you know, for the next half a mile, and then there's interior. So I don't know if anyone's concerned about the structure of landscaping if I'm doing something south of Route 1.
It depends on the site, though. I mean, if you're doing a subdivision versus adding on to something that's right along the water, those are gonna be two different, you know.
Right, but remember, our code will say if you're doing a parking lot right along the water, street trees 40 feet on center.
Which you don't want.
In the
Right,
landscape
right.
island.
No, you want somebody that's going to
that's
live
all-
and
I'm just saying, potentially
handle-
if we're south of an area or there's, you know, I don't think it's a hard demarcation line.
Mhm.
There's gotta be some flexibility in a
Yeah.
coastal landscape zone.
Soil-
There needs to be the ability to swap out.
right, soil types
Plant
and
material.
winds, but we don't want them to think they can just plant a bunch of grasses and be fine.
Correct.
Well, that's where you might get into more berming
Mhm.
to give a sense of character to the parking lot.
Yeah, like, you know, south of Route 1, I may not want to plant a green spire linden or a London plane tree.
Well, it's interesting because if you can now go onto the USDA website to see your hardiness zone, and you can go, for example, from where I live, going 3 miles towards Saunderstown, it goes from 6B to 7A. So there is
Not
difference,
much of a change.
and we've changed.
Oh,
Over
well,
the years.
yeah, we definitely have changed.
I don't know if you've ever seen that anywhere, Randy. Whether there's, you know, it's like you have a Plymouth landscape code and then you have a Natick landscape code, right?
Do they recognize the fact that there are different hardiness zones, you mean, or?
Not so much hardiness, just different, you know,
Their biggest thing
aesthetics, or-
Their biggest thing is soil difference. Hardiness is a big difference, but there's a lot of sand in Plymouth and a lot of those areas
So
on the
we
South
take-
Shore.
take Ocean Mist, right? Across the street, we have a pizza retail restaurant. If that ever gets redeveloped, they're gonna have to adhere to the landscape code or request relief. Because they're gonna
It's a
be
very
adhered
small
to the same
percentage. Yeah,
thing
but it's
as
a
if someone's building on Fairgrounds Road.
But-
You know, one, I'm worried about wind, one, I'm less
Right.
worried about wind.
Well, that would be,
One, I'm worried about soil conditions more
Right.
and
Right.
saltwater spray.
what was the name of the development that went in about 10, 15 years ago south of the Oyster Bar, Matunic Oyster Bar? On the right-hand side.
Right-hand side.
Yeah.
They did the small 800-900 square foot
No, these are
single
big,
family resident.
no, they're big ones on.
Oh, and with the cliff, there's like a cliff.
Is there?
Was,
I'll go to it, give me a second, it's been a while.
what did they call it? Not Matunic Hills.
It's right on the water.
Oh, so it's not the one that was on the formal gravel bank.
No, no.
There's Matunic Oyster.
Right, yeah, okay, I see it. Just pan down to, no, south of there. And go drag up the other way, sorry. I never would know which way to say that. Is it? No, it's not that. Oh, it's there, right there in the left hand.
This one here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because those are bigger homes than a couple of 900 square feet, aren't they?
That's not big.
But that would be, I think, to your point, that's a both a soils and exposure.
Right.
Yeah.
No, those are, I think 800 to 1,200 square feet each unit. They're primarily one bedrooms.
Are they really?
They look
1.2
bigger.
million.
Oh, yeah, that's the location.
They look big because they're elevated,
Mm.
so they're a relatively
Yeah.
somewhat small footprint. I want to say they're literally 22 by 30, 34.
What were the requirements for those? I mean,
Wasn't here.
that was real, how long ago was that? I said 10, 15, but it's probably longer than
May have
that.
got approved 15, 20 and not built until the last, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago, because I want to say when I came on board 5+ years ago, some of these were new construction for sale.
Yeah,
Yeah, but again, this has a different landscape code than if I do this on the northern part of South Road.
Right, but these types of areas are a much lower percentage than the remaining portions of.
Yeah.
right.
And then the other thing too is that in terms of selection of material and the actual planting and maintenance, it seems as though we have to be very thoughtful in terms of you need to be able to handle water and drought.
Good point.
Yeah, that,
Which doesn't always make it easier, but
I've seen some
Yeah.
regulations that include provisions for irrigation. And I was thinking, that's not something we were
Right.
thinking about.
nor are we going to get into xeriscaping, but
Right.
you know, trying to find that balance.
Well, that has, soils can have a big impact on that. So, a lot of, I have an item, a chapter called Stormwater Design and Planting. And a lot of times, that's two different professions that are working on it. And oftentimes, the stormwater is integrated into the overall site design as a exercise once you've sort of maximized the lots and they fit it in, and then if they need to take parts of lots, they'll do that.
Yeah, sometimes it becomes, to a certain extent, a restoration effort as well, depending on the site.
Right, so what's some of the bigger issues that you've had to deal with as it relates to that?
The stormwater?
Yeah,
Some of the discussions we've had early on with the developers is, you know, the engineer, the design team, I won't just say that, but the design team is looking at a number that they need to manage, right? And that number equates to the volume of water associated with runoff.
Mm.
And we'll say it's, 20,000 gallons. And they just pick the shape, which usually is the most efficient shape. It's a rectangle or a square, a square that fits in somewhere, versus trying to incorporate the storm drainage into the design of the site.
Right. Not using LID and, yep,
Right.
generic rain garden
And
installations
again, I think
that
there's
aren't really rain
there's
gardens at all.
appropriate, some developments just say, yeah, throw that big basin on the back 40 and let everybody forget about it. And then there are other more residentially friendly developments where can you incorporate some of the storm drainage into your design? And we did that on one, which was Northwoods.
Mhm.
That's the only one that we had an applicant saying, instead of doing
That's
a
true.
basin in front of a $1.5 million,
That's true.
let's try and build it as a landscape component that also can manage stormwater.
Yeah, and
I
that
don't
was an
know how we
FDRP and that
codify
was
that, Richard.
thoughtfully done, actually.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Yeah, those units are roughly 1,000 square feet.
So deceiving, isn't it?
Again, they're elevated, so they look like two-story colonials, and
Mm.
they're a ranch on stilts.
One of the things that we also encounter is the inability to, it's not that we're trying to hide a building, sometimes enhance it, sometimes create buffers in certain areas, but it's so out of scale with what you see for the buildings that it's almost,
One compared to another, you mean?
well,
Like the scale of one building next to a large building next to a small?
Or
No,
a
the-
commercial building, cluster housing next to
And
a
then-
huge commercial building,
Right.
like we just saw recently.
right, and landscaping that doesn't fit with the mass and the scale of the buildings.
Yeah, I've never seen a code that quantifies an increase in plantings based on density. Right, it's usually
There's-
just buffering that density from abutters. I think that was your point, I think correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying if I build a 4-story building and stick a 1-inch caliber tree out in front of it,
With the next one
that'll be
100 feet away.
that's okay in 30 years,
And,
Right.
right? But what,
and I think also not being thoughtful about the addition of understory plantings in a design, where you've got tree, nothing, tree, nothing, tree. And there's so many appropriate species that can be used. And in our current regs, there are 3 different scenarios for what they call buffers, but without any description of why one is appropriate and this is a full landscape buffer, this is it's not workable, not effective.
Yeah, the difficult, and I know Maria's point, Randy, so if you're doing a development, either a dense residential or a commercial, there are 3 options, and we'll say option A is I'm going from memory, a 20-foot semi-vegetated area between the two, whether they're compatible or incompatible uses. Option B is a 10-foot more heavily vegetated buffer, and option C is 6-foot tall fence.
Right.
There isn't, to Maria's point, if the developer wants to do a more dense development on the property, the default is I'll just build a 6-foot fence.
Right.
Where it doesn't necessarily articulate a goal of the community, it just allows them to immediately default to
Mm-hmm.
maybe not the best option, but it is a regulatory option they're allowed to do.
Right. So that's why I think this overall document that I passed around mentions a basis for the standards and location-specific provisions. That's showing the rationale for what we'd like to see.
And that's what, and I've written some regs where when commercial, and it's harder when there's so many different components to the town. When you're in a suburban town without main streets or downtowns or villages, it gets easier. Because when you say commercial abuts residential, you mandate a 50-foot buffer. So if a developer buys a 10-acre site, he immediately
that
has to go
reminds me.
around his property and take off 50 feet. And that is the buffer. That's easy in very suburban rural areas. Gets harder when you're buying a 2-acre site in the middle of, or an acre site in the middle of Peacedale, where if you take away the 50 feet, you're left with nothing. Or infill development. Infill development can't accommodate that big 20-foot buffer around the perimeter because nothing else will fit once you do that 20-foot perimeter buffer.
So I brought this was done, believe it or not, in 2001. It was Model Land Use Ordinances, and it was a South County Watersheds Technical Planning Assistant Project. I'm sure you'll recognize all the names from this, and there is very good general information about buffers and, again, looking at things from a watershed perspective.
So it's a model for a whole ordinance, not just landscaping, right?
Right.
Okay.
But you can look at,
Yeah, this, I flipped through this, it's on my shelf.
and this is the the original Conservation Development Manual, which is in the process, see if I can see what year this was, of being updated. 2003.
Another
General in nature, but really
Another
good
version
information.
of Randall Aaron.
Yeah. No, yeah, I thought I recognized that.
I put some post-it notes in the sections where they make some references to buffers and so on. So how do you think we should proceed? What should be kind of the next steps on this?
Well, I've used this meeting to re-engage myself partially
Mhm.
to this, so hearing about some of the issues is good. I think, and Jamie, if you have any landscape regs that you think are quality that I should be looking at, I ask the same thing of Maria, and I mean, anybody else wants to do it as well.
Lexington, Mass was one of the ones that I sent you. I also sent Randy there was this academic study that was done across the country in 2020 of various municipal landscaping regulations and what some of the similarities were, how they were managed. It's, typical long academic, but
I didn't read that one.
it mentions Lexington, Mass and some other places. So again, useful. I'll make sure I email that to folks. So when can we meet again, and what do you need anything from us in the interim?
I would say,
We last met in March, so we're gonna try to tighten the
I tightened the
timeline a
schedule a
little.
bit.
Speed it up.
What does the week of December 8th look like?
Town council meeting Monday, planning board Tuesday.
Tuesday the 9th.
TRC Wednesday
Morning.
morning.
Is the following week better? It is the week before Christmas.
Probably the other one is, we only have one meeting in December. It's the only month that we only have one.
I mean, the 10th is fine if we can meet
Mm.
earlier, the better, if everybody can
10th?
do.
Fine. The 10th is
10th,
okay.
10th is good for everyone
Could
else.
you do 4 o'clock, Randy?
Yep.
Can everybody do 4?
Yeah. Now that it's dark out at 4.
It seems like it.
Doesn't really matter what time we do, right? Randy, do you have an assignment for us?
No, I think I've got, yeah, the assignment would be within the next, before Thanksgiving, if there's a compelling landscape reg that you've come across, send it to me.
Okay.
But just knowing the time that I have, I think what I would be bringing would be a revised table of contents with sub-chapters that outline the different things that addresses, and probably and I don't know if this will apply to every chapter, but an intent statement of what is trying to be accomplished, so that would be something that everybody could review, and if we are all on the same page or revise it based on it, then that will guide the putting the meat on the bones of the regs.
Sounds good. So shall we adjourn? And we'll see everyone in December.
You'll see everyone.
And I'll send huh?
You'll see us. on-
Yes, true.
It's true.
I'll send everyone those documents.